Eric Burgess here with Music Marketing TV, and today I want to go over some of the most powerful features Harmor is packing. A lot of people don't know Harmor can do some of these things. Let's dive right into it. So Harmor finds its way into nearly every production that I do because it completely delivers on what an additive synthesizer should be able to do. So if you don't know, a lot of synths are labeled additive, but they're not really additive, like in the full true sense of what an additive synth should be. So for example, a subtractive synth will generate a waveform, and the way it generates this waveform, it will use some sort of a math process. Maybe it's generating it through like actual analog gear through changing voltage or whatever it is. And it generates a waveform, and then we take this generated waveform and we begin to distort it. Maybe we subtract things from it. We do like filtering, and we begin to shape it into what we want. And this can bring all sorts of problems with the process as well. And it just limits, you can't do certain things that you could do in additive. What do I mean by that? Well, in additive synthesis, you just generate the waveform that you want right from the gate. There's not this post-processing. You can, of course, do subtractive synthesis after, but additive is really cool. Say you want to filter something out, and you filter out 100 hertz using EQ on a saw wave. Let's just say you do that. Additive synthesizers can just generate a waveform without 100 hertz. It can just not be there, just be completely gone. So let me show you what I mean here. So here we're going to build our way up because there's three features I really want to get to. The idea of being able to individually affect harmonics, the idea of resynthesizing an entire sound, just straight up using the harmonic information. And we also want to get to index mapping, which is something Harmor does really well. And maybe a little bit of how modular Harmor actually is. So here's Harmor. And what we're going to do is we're going to come in and let's just say we have a filter. So here's our filter. Typical filter. Normally, you'd have something like this. But this is no ordinary filter. This is an additive filter. These things that are disappearing aren't disappearing necessarily because it's being filtered. It can just straight up additively generate these disappearing as well. It can just generate a waveform at that moment in time with this particular spectrum, and then we move over a little bit in this particular spectrum, and then a little bit over in this particular spectrum. It can just make that for us. So what do I mean? Well, let me show you how crazy this can get. If we come in here, we'll notice there's a custom shape, which is really weird. You don't see this in synthesizers, but this is an additive synthesizer. So here's our spectrum, and this would be called the shape of the filter, right? It's a low pass filter. Well, we could have some really bizarro shape that would just be impossible. For example, we could have a brick wall filter, something people are always trying to do. Additive synthesizers, because they generate it, they can just not make these frequencies. Perfect brick wall filter. Like, it's pretty dang crazy. And so if we bring this down, this over, let's just run with something like this. This crazy bizarre shape. Good luck trying to make this with an EQ and getting the same result. Like, it's just not going to happen unless you're using some of the really, really recent stuff that is now doing basically additive synthesis under the hood. And you'll see that Harmor can also pretty much do that as well. So if we play our note, look at that perfect brick wall. Let's adjust it a bit, shall we? We can go ahead, you can see right there what's going on, and you can make your own shape. This is insanely useful in sound design. You're making growls or something. You can get these really, really cool filter shapes going, and you can also get a really nifty resonance. So resonance also has a custom shape option. So we could have some really weird resonance. And we can do that with our second filter and have its own custom shape. And by the way, there's two sides, so you can imagine how crazy this can get. And you might be wondering, why don't they show the hertz values here, the frequency values? Well, it's because they have a width control that allows you to control how wide these things actually are. Like, just that right there sounds pretty cool. We toss on a distortion. away you go. You're doing some really crazy sound design. So that's our first thing, extreme control over individual harmonics. And the filters are just something else here, along with the resonance and whatnot. Next thing, harmonic index mapping. So let's go to a default patch here so we don't get too crazy. And we're going to go to so Unison. Okay, so there's a Unison here and there's a chorus here. A chorus works by cloning your signal and then, detuning it a bit. A Unison works by just making a new signal that's been detuned a little bit. It's an additive process. And so because of that, we can generate the second, so the order is like how many? We could have 5 waveforms. We're going to do 2 to keep it simple. And we can have them be independently affected by all of these controls. Each voice just completely separately affected. And that's called index mapping. Some more synths are beginning to roll out features like this. This is an incredible tool. So let me show you. So here we've got our filter. And we can hear our Unison going, behaving kind of like a chorus would. And what we're going to do is if we come in to, say, the filter. So let's go to the filter. Now, I know this looks scary. This is the thing that scares everyone. This menu right here, not that bad. Trust me, as you get used to it and you look at what things are, they're all labeled really clearly. So as long as you kind of know what you're doing, your synthesis, this is actually really, really intuitive. So what do we want to affect? We want to affect the frequency. So we're going to go to filter 1 frequency. And in here, they have a Unison index mapping. And what this says is how much things are affected. And so check this out. If I want 9 voices, I can clone. I can have 9 copies being played. Or I could have, we're going to go down to 2, but you see I'm given control over each one individually. Okay, so check this out. What we're going to do is I've added a point here. I'm going to move this point around and change one voice completely independently of the voice over here. And you're going to hear, because there's the panning of these voices, you're going to hear one voice in one headphone really clearly, and the other voice will be super filtered. So now we're going to move up. And if we change the panning here, we can make it a bit more mono in case you want to keep things more in the center when you do this. But really, really cool way to generate an image. And maybe we want that one to be super filtered. Maybe we have 5 voices. And then our next voice is open for some reason. Maybe not all the way, maybe just some. And we'll bring the width up. We'll bring the width down. And maybe we'll have our next voice. And so you can begin to do things that are unusually specific. Combine that with the filter abilities that we have, and you have just a crazy sound design tool. And let's go ahead and move over to the modular side of Harmor. So here we have in the advanced tab, the order the processing happens in. And this is something that sometimes is offered to you, but this is the way it's been offered here is truly awesome. So what you can do is you can actually change the order that these things happen in. So for example, let's say that we want distortion. You notice it happens first by default. And this makes sense because if you do reverb and then distortion, it's going to sound dang crazy and usually not very usable or likable. But let's go ahead. Let's turn on the distortion. Now these effects in here affect both sides A and B, and they are subtractive in nature. So they're just like your processing that you would expect. And what we're going to do is we're going to run a log through this. So just crazy big sound, maybe dial it back even more. And if you heard the adjustment here, we notice that we're not actually we're not filtering this output. What we're doing is we're filtering the input because these are all additive controls. And in the advanced tab, we can see over here, there's a difference between the unit order and the effects order. And so they fall into different categories. So maybe we need to do something in post in order to get these to be filtered. Because for example, if I take this down a lot, very high frequency content still coming through, even though it's not being shown here. And that's because we've picked a very aggressive distortion. Now, what I can do is I can move this distortion after the chorus. And if we turn the chorus on, a lot, that's what it would sound like versus putting it before. a much more likable sound. So the default order makes like a lot of sense, but sometimes coming in here, moving these things around and changing, for example, where the filters happen is extremely powerful. And just to show you on the distortion, like if we did want to dial it back, we would have to bring in an EQ and do something like that if we wanted to actually filter it afterwards. So that is pretty interesting. Now to finish it off, there is an incredible thing that Harmor can do. It's the ability to take a sound. So if you think about a sound is just a bunch of spectrums being played continuously. So like my voice, at each moment in time, there's a spectrum my voice generates, and that spectrum has frequency, it has phases, and it has amplitudes. I'm picturing like the spectrum, like a spectrum right here, but it's got those things. And if we actually take, so here's a preset I just want to show you. So I'm going to jump the gun a little bit, but we can drop recordings in, and then specifically it's this one.
Do you see the things I see?
And it was sung monotone, specifically because what Harmor can do is you can actually come in, have it analyze it, and it will look at and generate a map. Basically, those tables of frequency, phase, and amplitude over time, this is a picture of those tables. And it can read them out and synthetically affect them. And check this out. We can like play it.
What I believe. Do you see the things I see? Do you believe what I believe? Do you see the things I see? Do you believe what I believe?
Pretty dang crazy. And this, I mean, I'm going to stop here. This is just the tip of the iceberg. This is usually why people buy Harmor in the first place, is the things you can do with this as a sample engine, because you can change speed, you can change formants, you can do all this processing on a per frequency basis. You want a perfect brick wall filter, drop your sound in here, have a note, play it back at the correct pitch, and then just draw your filter in, and you can perfectly filter your stuff. Like it's pretty amazing. Honestly, this synth it's amazing how kind of old it is. It's been around a while, and still how good it is. Like there's not really been something I can actually compare it to, which is why it's still in my top 10, like easily usable in pretty much every project that I do. If you have any questions about this, let me know. If there's a feature that I didn't cover that you thought is definitely something that should be covered, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.